just for fun.
Yeah, it's more. Estimates are about 100 million sharks per year.
I'm sorry, say that again?
100 million sharks a year.
Are killed by humans?
Yes. Yes. So you can imagine this is not sustainable.
In this episode, I'm talking with Fabienne Ziadi Künzli, an ETH alumna and Swiss researcher at OIST in Okinawa, Japan, where she studies fish ecology. This is the We Are ETH podcast, and I'm Susan Kish, your host. Fabienne, good morning, good evening. You're joining us from Okinawa, right?
Yes, good morning, Susan. It's evening here, but nevertheless.
We've figured out the time zone, so this is fantastic.
Yes.
So, Ichthyology, I didn't pronounce that correctly. Tell me how.
Fish research, fish studies. I got interested actually during my time at ETH.
Mm-hmm.
I had really no interest at all in fish originally. I was more interested in Amazon or,
You studied biology at the ETH?
biology, yes.
A master's in biology, yep.
Yes, exactly. And we had a course there, and one professor, Armin Peter, he just convinced me to study fish. I just liked his lectures, and I got really fascinated by fish, even though it's freshwater fish in Swiss, and there are not so many species in Swiss. But either way, I just got interested into this kind of area. And so I decided to dedicate my time to fish.
Fabulous. And so let's talk about fish for a moment. Because I've read about you and fish and sharks, you and fish and octopus, you and fish and the world famous mudskipper and crutching. So it does seem to be a pretty wide range of fish there. But can we focus on these mudskippers for a moment?
Sure.
Because you published a really interesting article and it got a lot of pickup, right?
Yes.
So what was so cool about mudskippers? Why did you focus on them? And why don't you tell people, draw a picture with your words of what a mudskipper is.
So a mudskipper is a fish that can live outside of the water.
How many fish can do that?
Actually, several fish can do that, but not as permanent and sustained as mudskippers. So mudskippers really shifted out their life kind of outside of the water. They feed outside, but for reproduction, they still need the mud flat or kind of water areas, brackish areas to dig tunnels, so where they lay the eggs. So they still need the water, but they can.
Are there mudskippers near you in Okinawa?
Yeah, they're just around the corner.
Well, that's convenient. In those mangrove swamps.
Yes, so they like mangroves or mud flats, and they like this brackish environment.
Okay. And what allows them to be both mobile in the water and mobile on land?
Yeah, they have different specializations or adaptations. And one of it is that they can walk on land.
Is that the crutching that you talk about?
Yes, exactly. So this is the only fish that can do this kind of locomotion. And it's unique to this kind of group of fish. So there's several species of mudskippers. It's not just one, but they all do this kind of locomotion. And so originally, coming back to your question, why we did this study is because my boss, who is a physicist, so I'm actually in the physics unit.
A physicist?
Yes.
Okay.
Even though marine biologist. But he and his colleague, they published on the human foot initially. So the human foot has this longitudinal arch, so we have bipedal walking, and we need this arching of the foot for walking.
Okay.
It's actually also the transverse arch, so from inside to outside of the foot, that is responsible for the stiffness of the foot, so that we can walk and run and do this kind of locomotion. And so they were wondering, okay, if we can do it, how do walking fish do it? are the same principle in place, because this arching creates stiffness.
Uh-huh.
They were asking this question, and they were looking for a marine biologist who can do the anatomy or morphology of the fins. So I was looking at fins. I used micro CT, computer tomography imaging.
What is tomography? What does that mean?
Yeah, so this is a machine that you can use. It emits X-rays.
Yeah.
And you can image anything you put into the machine.
3D imaging.
As 3D imaging, and you can reconstruct this kind of images and create then 3D models from any structure you want to visualize.
So can you then virtually assemble or virtually dissect your models once you've built them?
Yes, so I have
that's
to
cool.
drawings by hand. So to pick the structure I'm interested in, and then through a kind of an algorithm, you can interpolate your drawings, and then it creates a 3D model.
Oh, that's nifty. Okay.
Yeah, it's quite an interesting technique. And so, because usually otherwise you have to dissect the fin.
Right. And which means you have to collect a whole bunch of them. Smelly.
Yeah, that's the least problem, but it's so small. So mudskippers are not so big. So
How big are they?
Centimeters. The common size is
like
10
a hand width.
Yeah. There's a giant mudskipper. It's like 20 centimeters, but it's more in Malaysia. But those we have here, they're smaller. So if you have a tiny fish, good luck with dissection. It's really difficult. So this kind of tomography imaging is so beneficial and so handy, and you can create really everything you want to highlight, really. So, and that's why we could then kind of assemble a soft tissue in the model and also the bones. And then, so I was looking just as a kind of baseline.
Mm-hmm.
I created this kind of library of muscles and tissue and what is there in the fin, and then published this initially. Yeah, and so my boss, he wanted to know, what is it? Is it a curvature of the fish, or what is it? But I really had to disappoint him. It's not the curvature that produces stiffness. It's actually the mass, I think, of the fin. So mudskipper have these big fins. It's kind of fleshy.
These are the fins on their tummies, on their stomachs?
On the side.
Or which fins?
On
their sides.
They swing them. Yeah, they swing them forward and they crutch. And so, because it's still, the gravitational forces on land are so much more intense than in water, right? Mm-hmm. So they have to move the whole body, even though if they're small, they would still feel the gravitational forces. So through these kind of fleshy fins, they manage to walk and keep kind of balance and stabilize their body while walking.
And one of your articles talks about discovering fascia tissue, but within the fin. What does that mean, and why was that important?
Yeah, so instead of single tendons, usually muscles in fish insert on each fin ray. So fish have fin rays. Mm-hmm. They help to activate each fin ray so the fish can move the fin in the water inside, outside, making this kind of round movement. But the mudskippers somehow replace this with this kind of tissue, thick tissue, to stabilize the fin better. Mm-hmm. So we still don't really know the real function of it, but it seems somehow to help with walking and produce force. Yeah.
And do you find fascia in a lot of fish fins? Interesting.
A lot of different fish, close relatives, distant relatives, other fish that can move outside of the water, but it's only found so far in mudskippers. So it's a unique trait. It's exclusive.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So have humans descended from mudskippers?
No. It's kind of, well, our ancestors also had fleshy fins, so-called lobe fin fish. And probably they did a similar thing, but we don't know because we cannot, muscle doesn't fossilize. So we don't know how muscles were, how the fins, what kind of muscles they had. So we only have the skeleton and bony framework preserved. But for mudskippers, it's a contemporary species. And so you can infer kind of how it may have looked like in our ancestors, but it doesn't mean it was the same thing. So it's kind of divergent evolution, we call that.
Got it. So in your study about fish, you described yourself as studying fish ecology, right?
Yes.
So what are the big challenges you see to this fish ecology? Is it fishing? Is it overfishing? Is it climate change? Is it microplastics? What are the challenges you're seeing in your studies of fish ecology?
Well, I'm mainly looking at tropical fish, reef fish previously, or also mudskippers, let's say, but not specifically now, how to say. Well, I'm looking at the kind of setting these fish are living in, and there are several problems that the marine ecosystem is facing. It's not just climate change, but it depends on the species you're looking at or the ecosystem. If you look at coastal ecosystems, we have different problems compared to deeper areas, let's say.
Makes sense.
Yes, so the deep sea is still pretty unknown. No, there's just not much data available about the deep sea. So yeah, it really depends where you look at. But overall, of course, climate change is affecting also the island here. We had just recently a coral bleaching, and yeah, that was not so motivating. Several coral reefs were affected in Okinawa, but
Is that a single, when you describe it as such, it sounds like it was an overnight phenomenon, this coral bleaching. Did it happen sort of suddenly or
no,
over
it takes
time?
time. The temperature has to be high for a certain time. So it doesn't happen in 1 or 2 days, but I think the rough time frame is about 2 weeks. And
Wow.
if temperature doesn't decrease within this kind of time window, then the corals have a hard time and then they just die. And the problem was we didn't have a typhoon or a strong typhoon this year, so the water temperature was just kept high, and that killed some of the corals, yeah. Unfortunately.
Because of where you live in Okinawa, are you mainly focused on what you call coastal fish ecosystems, or do you also look at other fish ecosystems?
Coral reef fish, also, but I mean, sharks, my main interest are sharks.
There's a great statistic you have in your LinkedIn profile that sharks kill 12 people a year, but people kill 11,414 sharks a year. It sounds a little bit disproportionate.
Yeah, it's more. It's estimates are about 100 million sharks per year.
I'm sorry, say that again?
100 million sharks a year.
Are killed by humans?
Yes. Yes. So you can imagine this is not sustainable.
Yeah.
And yeah, their main factor is fisheries. Yeah. That's bad.
You say fisheries, I think of fisheries as place you grow fish. So how do they kill 100 million plus sharks?
Through bycatch or direct or targeted fisheries. So these big fishing fleets are, let's say, fishing for tunas, but also sharks. Or coastal fisheries are also people consume sharks.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, you cannot eat shark meat. It's maybe not the best quality, but you can still eat sharks. Either you cook it, or in Japan, sometimes they eat them even raw as sashimi, but that's rare. But yeah, there's a big market for sharks, also shark fins. especially in Asia, it's kind of a delicacy in Asian region to eat shark soup. And so that creates these target fisheries for sharks. And it's a combined um, kind of, it's not just fisheries, but the main factor is fisheries.
How do you explain these concepts to kids? And how do you work with kids? Is it formally or informally? German, Japanese?
No, we have usually translating person with us and translator that helps, because explaining these things in Japanese is really difficult. So this is difficult for me to do. So we usually have somebody coming along, and then we would go to school, or we have events also at the institute, and I would present more to a general audience, but specifically to kids, about sharks and their importance in the ecosystem. So we need sharks for healthy oceans. It's very well known. Without sharks, we do not have healthy oceans, because they're occupying as predators. They're on top of the food web, so they are regulating actually marine food webs.
Can you explain what a food web is?
So food web is a shark would eat the bigger fish, a bigger fish would eat a smaller fish, fish would eat crustaceans and so on. And then you end up with algae or zooplankton. And so it's like bigger fish it's just going up the food web. But in reality, these marine food webs are very complex. So we still don't really understand it. But sharks fulfill this kind of key role in our oceans. It's like a wolf in terrestrial ecosystems. Wolves are very important to regulate deer populations. And so this is the same function that sharks have in oceans. And that's why if we remove them, it's really not good. So that's our main fear, as biologists.
I think the public perception of sharks is, from that movie Jaws, right? We're scared of sharks, right? They're big, scary things that eat humans with really, really big jaws and heavy teeth. So how do you change that public perception of sharks as the ultimate scary fish?
Well, sharks are big, some of them, not all, but some sharks are really big, and they can be dangerous. So it's not like that you go into the ocean and you want to hug a shark. No, you have to be aware that they're predators. But first, it's very also difficult to actually meet a shark. It's not so easy to just they're not so abundant. Depends where, but there are several species that are potentially dangerous, but you can still swim in the ocean without fear and without this kind of fear of sharks, because we are not in their main spectrum as a food prey. I think they know that we are not kind of the usual organism that swims around in the ocean. So they're pretty smart, I think. So they can distinguish between us and probably a fish, I think. So there are accidents happening, but it's often by mistake, probably. And they're usually not fatal, these attacks, but it can happen.
Talk to us about your time at the ETH. It sounds like it was a pivot point, right? It pivoted you to the study of sharks and fish and those areas. What else did you take away from those years at the ETH?
Well, actually, I had a great time. It was, I really loved it. It was great. It was hard too. I mean, I was just studying and focusing on the course. And so, I guess I learned a lot, really. So this ETH provides this kind of solid foundational higher education. Really learn a lot. It's not just biology. There are many different topics you learn, and it's also the kind of practical training and hands-on training that was really nice. We had lots of field trips, and in all kinds of areas. Because Swiss is quite diverse, has a lot of different ecosystems. So we learn, a lot about these ecosystems and through direct experience. So that was really great. I really loved it.
What of that time, what of your ETH experience helped you prepare for the work that you do today?
It was a lot of information we had to, or we were getting, and it's, I don't know, it was just very diverse. And I think people end up in very different kind of jobs. And
Yep,
but
they really
I think
do.
it prepared me well also in terms of discipline and focusing and just, but also curiosity.
Great.
So I think curiosity is also a big driver. I mean, for me in particular, but I think for other people as well. But that's why I returned to research, because I wanted to know more and
That's a
about
great way to
our
put it.
whole planet. And somehow also maybe with the intent to maybe conserve or help to spread information, gather information, because we cannot protect anything if we do not have information, let's say about species or ecosystem. We need this information initially. Otherwise, there's no conservation happening. It's impossible.
Very well put. And I love that connection between curiosity and learning. Fabienne, thank you so much. That was a great conversation. And I've come away learning a lot more about sharks and about mudskippers and about Okinawa. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan.
I'd like to close by asking you a few of the questions we ask each of our guests. So when you were a little girl, 8, 9 years old, what did you want to be when you grew up?
I had to really think hard about this, but I think I wanted to be initially a veterinarian. And then, and then at one point, somehow sports athlete, and then again, somehow an explorer. I don't know. It was constantly changing, but yeah.
Sounds like you've sort of been able to do all of those things.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, maybe not a veterinarian for animals that way, but sounds like you do a lot of work with fish, right?
Yes.
That. And secondly, what are you curious about today? What are you learning about today?
Well, because I have limited time actually a little bit for myself because of all the activities I have, also with my children. I do not have really time to read books because I read mainly publications for my research to constantly expand and learn what's up to date in each field. So I haven't touched a book recently. There are several books on my shelf I started, but never finished.
Got it. If someone's interested in your topics, are there any books that you would recommend that people read, or podcasts, or things for the more casual but curious to listen to?
I like the book The Song of the Dodo by David Quammen. It's I think 2006, so it came out at that time, but it's still super interesting, and it's quite a thick book, but it teaches a lot about extinction, island biogeography, and kind of adaptations of species. And it's a storytelling scientific book, so I really like that. It makes it easier to understand for everybody, and it's just easy, also very nice to read.
That's great. And when you go back to Zurich, what is your favorite place in Zurich, either at the ETH or in the town at large, by the lake?
Actually, I don't go really to Zurich. I still make it home. Yeah. But I have my favorite place when I was studying, and
that'd be good.
Natural History Museum just next to the main campus.
Yes, I loved that museum. I used to go there all the time.
Yes, I
had little kids, so it was a great
collection. You can watch all these species exhibited. And at that time, it was so funny because they had a giant sloth exhibited, a furry sloth, and that they were like really big. This was a South American species, got extinct. But they had this model there, and we were always hugging the giant sloth.
Hugging the sloth. That is a great image. Thank you so much. Fabienne, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Delighted. I'm Susan Kish, host of the We Are ETH podcast series, telling the stories of the alumni and friends of ETH Zurich, the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology. ETH regularly ranks amongst the top institutions and universities of the world with cutting-edge research, science, and people. The people who were there, the people who are there, and most importantly, the people who will be there. Please subscribe to this podcast and join us wherever you listen. And if you enjoyed today's conversation, please give us a good rating on Spotify or Apple or YouTube. I'd like to close by thanking our producers at ETH Alumni and LE Media, and especially thank you, our listeners, for joining us.